I thought we'd start off today by going, this is contracts and disclosures, and maybe we'll talk about disclosures, and then next couple of weeks, we'll do contracts, right? I don't think we'll have time to do both, even though I know you might want to. How do you get all the disclosures? If you're logged into the kw.com or mykw.com and you click on Market Center Intranet, an area you should be very familiar with, go to every day. I don't really think that's true, but anyhow. Once you're here, you can click on Market Center. And once you're in Market Center, you can click on Documents. And once you're in Documents, Disclosures and Forms 2015 would be a good place to start. And then there's a listing template with WIN forms and KW disclosures. I think I covered last week, if you click on listing template with WIN forms, why don't I do it? This is what you're going to see. And this has pretty much what we're looking for in a complete file if you have a listing. Many of these, by the way, are what we're looking for a buyer, but we're going to talk about listings. Now, it will say sometimes where you would find the form. Some things are generic KW forms, not in WIN forms. Lindsay has put that there for you. Transaction coordinators, of which Lindsay is part of that group, are very checklist oriented. And so what they would like is everything that's on the checklist as part of the package, no matter what, right? So an example is, I'm going to go through the different disclosures. There's a earthquake disclosure form, which the California law requires is filled out. I'm sure all of you know this already, but the requirement is that it's required to be filled out if the property was built before 1960, if it is a wood frame residence, and before 1975, if it is a masonry building with a wood frame. You all knew that, of course. Well, usually nobody knows that, right, that part. So what we do is we include the form anyhow for all listings. Do you understand? Just fill it out. Why not? Right? There's a street tree disclosure. There's a bunch, and a lot of these forms, by the way, you're going to find are included in some of the natural hazard disclosures. Like the San Jose street tree disclosure is part of the JCP disclosure. Right, so one of the things that would make this a little bit easier is learning, if you're the listing agent, you sort of get a right to choose which natural hazard disclosure you're going to use, and some of them have the San Jose area, Santa Clara County specific disclosures. So these are all the different things we would like, and most of these are part of the are on WIN forms, and the ones that are not are mentioned here. All right, so what we're going to do, so we've clicked on that. I wanted to go through the disclosures. This is not a conceptually difficult thing. What I thought I would do is show you a way of filling it out, perhaps. Now, some of this, this looks awful, this transaction information authorization form, right, which is also known as a payoff statement. Now, by the way, I just sort of have to say this, right? Your options for filling out the forms are a few. First, you could print them out, and then you could handwrite on them what the information is, and then have people sign them. That's number one, print them out, handwrite it in. Number two, well, we don't have typewriters anymore. So if we print them out, we either have to handwrite it in. If we want to type it in, what we need to do is to have software that allows us to type them in. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Software that allows you to fill out a PDF. Right, now, what I'm going to do, just because you guys are so nice, And it just occurred to me that I ought to do this. So what I'm going to do, just don't tell anybody. What did I do with this? KWMCI disclosures. We have in our office programs from Adobe Acrobat. It's on almost all the computers. But this is more of an offbeat program. It's called Foxit, F-O-X-I-T. It's something you have to pay for, which is why most real estate agents don't have it. And if I click on form, it's got a form recognition tool. And I've clicked on OK, and you see that? Look, you see that? Wasn't that beautiful, right? Now it's not perfect. If I over caffeinated myself one night, I would go and fill it out, but maybe I could get the front desk. You understand that we have to add in a couple of things. But what this would allow you to do, I mean, for $2, I'll send you a copy, is you could just type this information out. Okay, $1.50. I'll send you a copy. All right, and so I'll add, because I like to type them out, right, rather than filling them out by hand, right? I'd rather just type out the information. There's no easy way to merge, but that program has got most of them. It's possible to put little boxes. So let's just go through this. Typing, see, that one worked really good, didn't it? And you could type out the information. Now this could be sent to them in advance, and I can show you different ways of doing that as we go through this, where they would fill out their information, put in loan information, approximate balance, homeowner association, management company's names, address, phone number, pay off lenders, and there's a place for them to sign, right? All of this can be done electronically, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Doesn't that sound like fun? And then this is the residential earthquake hazards report, which is required if the property was built before 1960 or 1975. But we're going to do it anyhow, because if you don't do it, people are going to complain that our file is missing one. By the way, my theory about this, I used to be one of those, I don't know, pain in the asset kind of listing agents, because I knew what the rules were, and if the property was built in 1970 something, I didn't do an earthquake disclosure. And what would happen is we'd be in escrow, and the agent representing the buyer would call me up, or their transaction coordinator would call me up and say, we don't have an earthquake disclosure. And I said, I know. And they said, well, we need one. And I said, no, you don't. And they said, well, it's on our list. You've got to give us one. And I said, no, I don't. And I actually had agents call me up and say, the office says they won't pay me my commission unless I have this form. To which I would say, you're working for the wrong office if the form is not required. And my feeling is that if they really wanted the form and it was not required, they should have asked for it when they wrote the offer in the first place. But as a listing agent, I'm not giving you anything I don't have to give you, right? And certainly not a week before escrow is supposed to close, right? Do you understand? So if you're the listing agent and you gave somebody a form just because they wanted it, and it was a week before escrow close, that gives the buyer 3 days to look at the form and decide they don't want to buy the house. So if the buyer decides they don't want to buy that, they want it out anyhow, you gave them a piece of paper you weren't required to give them, and they backed out of the transaction. Can you imagine how the discussion is going to go with the lawyer when you're being deposed before your lawsuit, right? As they're asking you, why did you do this? So if you do it all in advance, this is all cool. Right now, and I'll go through and I'll show Lily how to put the boxes in, but we could make this a little more interactive. So why do we want this information about the seller payoff? Because there may not be enough money, and it might be a short sale. How about that? But we want to collect this information. The earthquake hazards report, it didn't get every box. So by the way, using one of these forms, I could add something here. If I wanted to. I don't really feel like doing all this right now. And you check, this is why this is a dangerous form. Is the water heater brace trap? They probably know that. Is the house anchored or bolted to the foundation? Do you think most homeowners know, yes or no? They have no idea. So they're going to pick, I don't know. Do you understand? The buyer can back out, right? Now, if you do this all in advance, The goal is, if you're the listing agent, to get everything in advance. Everything includes all of these filled out, signed by the seller. You want the transfer disclosure statement, your agent visual inspection disclosure, the lead-based paint, the water. You want everything. You want the natural hazard disclosure with the environmental. You want a termite, a roof, a chip. You want everything, and you want it in advance so that the agent, the buyers, when they're making the offer, they have to sign a receipt that says they've received and accept all of these documents. And that means that they can't back out based on this. If you give it to them before they make the offer, then they can't use it as a reason to back out. So there's no problem with giving people the street tree disclosure when it's not in San Jose, or the earthquake disclosure when it's a 1990 year. As long as you do it in advance, right? It's that once you're in escrow, to give people disclosures you don't have to is a mistake, right? Allows them out. So I've had agents very experienced ask me, what's a cripple wall, right? You know, and I won't say, the first comment I made, I'm not going to say it. It's a wall to keep, anyhow, the cripples out. But you can Google search it, but a cripple wall is a raised, by the way, do you think it's possible that some seller might ask you that question? Mm-hmm. Right? Do you think that's possible, that somebody that might look at this and say, what's, so, and by the way, the earthquake booklet from which this page is torn has pictures of cripple walls, right? But a cripple wall is when you have a foundation, basically you have some wooden posts that are up, and then the floor is on top of those wooden posts. And so the problem is, think of crutches, right? And if there's an earthquake, they go back and forth and fall over. So if you saw pictures during the big earthquake, like in the Marina District, where homes were like leaning on their side, they had cripple walls. I actually am a believer that you ought to read the book, the Environmental Hazards Earthquake Safety book, and understand what's going on with all these forms. Is the house, some of this you probably know, but a lot of this is I don't know. Some of it is no, but you want all this filled out. And I like to have it all. My goal would be to type all of it up and make it so that it could be electronically filled out, right? And I'm going to show you how to do this. This is the Keller Williams Realty Disclosure Addendum. And I have to drop in some more fields. It wasn't perfect, but anyhow. For the property address, we can put little boxes. San Jose, there's a Jacob Wetterling Registration Act, and there's a hotline, a Morgan Hill San Martin. If you're not there, don't check it. East Foothills are a tough place, could be a tough place to be in an earthquake. Did you know that we have airfields? There's an amphitheater in Mountain View. Saratoga, there's noise, there's Caltrains, there's the Southern Pacific. Do you understand? People will buy a house and say, I didn't know I could hear the train. Right? I didn't know that you could hear shoreline, right? Even though, then notice some of these are checked for you. Possible school overcrowding, water-related issues, and the mold allergen advisory. Now, there is already going to be a copy of the mold allergen advisory included in the natural hazard disclosures. Most of them do, not all of them. But if you're, long as you're using the JCP or property ID, you know. And by the way, one of the things that I've thought about dragging in one of those people to go through one with you, but you ought to at some point read what the JCP report is saying. But you'll find that there, and so there's a mold allergen advisory already checked. There's an advisory regarding homeowners insurance coverage. Now what is the name of the report that would tell you, that would give you more information about homeowners insurance coverage? If you had a clue, it would be called the clue report, right? And what does that stand for? It's a comprehensive loss underwriting examination. So evaluation, so basically, the idea is that if somebody has ever used their homeowner's insurance, they may not let you have more on that house. There's two issues regarding the insurance coverage. If the house has submitted too many claims, they don't want you to have insurance. And if the people, let's say the buyers, that's their problem, but if they've submitted too many claims in the past, they may not want to insure them. So there's a advisory regarding homeowners insurance. Why is that needed? Why can't you just waive it? The bank requires it. All right, the lender's going to require it. Seller insurance history claims should be completed by seller. Have you filed any claims? If so, tell us about them. And other explanations.
So we need to check the ones that may apply up above.
Right, and there's some that are already checked for you.
Right.
You don't get a choice.
Okay.
Don't try to white them out.
So airfields would be checked for the most part.
Well, not everywhere. If you're in Almaden, there aren't too many landings, going over, but
So that doesn't have to do with air traffic noise at all.
it does. But basically, this one is saying that if you're near, you could check that if you wanted to. Why not? You could. Basically, but the idea is that does it apply? Right now, Almaden and Los Gatos aren't near the airfield. If you're selling property on the east side, then it might be near the airfield. But the idea is you're supposed to think about it. By the way, the natural hazards disclosures usually disclose proximity to those things as well. Yes, question?
Is there any spot to check about being rather close to a freeway due to the noise and the dust?
Is there a spot? That's a good question. Not on this form, but is there a spot on another form that asks that question?
SPQ.
The SPQ.
Okay. And if it's omitted, then of course you put it in the avid.
Even if it's not omitted, you might put it in the avid.
That's true. Okay.
All right. Plus, I believe that the transfer disclosure asks them that question as well. Okay. So the SPQ is another. We're going through the Keller Williams forms right now, but there's a bunch of them, and now we'll talk about the others. Why don't we'll go through that? California Energy Commission. So does everybody understand this one so far? I'm going to put in the little lines. I always like the lines. I know that not everybody has access to Adobe Acrobat or something like that. Once it's in, I was a much better typist than handwriting. So this form basically talks about duct sealing requirements. It's a letter to homeowners. This is also included in some of the natural hazard disclosures. Right? I wouldn't trip about the fact that some of these we're going to end up with a couple of copies. Right? Sometimes that's done to make sure we're sure we have one. Right? And it's a lot easier for Lindsay to get all of this back as one group. There's a receipt for the Energy Commission letter. So first there's the letter, then there's a place for them to sign, them being the buyer and the seller, that says that they've gotten a copy. Do you understand why this is a lot easier to get when they're making an offer than it is to pry out of them later? All right, what are you going to do if later the buyer's not signing it? Cancel the transaction, right? You don't even you understand? So this is all good to do prior, but that also means you need to make sure. Now this is I've got the booklet. Now this is, I know people have asked me about why is this here. The booklet, does everybody realize that if you represent a buyer, you're supposed to give them the Homeowner's Guide to Environmental Hazard Safety and with all that other kind of stuff? By the way, I used to go through it with buyers. Right, not every page, but I actually would talk about what was in it with them. Right, I've had people order not only radon gas, but asbestos inspections. Right, the asbestos, the machine that measures asbestos levels is like the old Geiger counters that you'd see in the movies. It would make clicking noise. It was interesting. By the way, and there was asbestos everywhere. So what we want is for them to sign here. There's, again, you put in the property address, date, time, buyer's signature, and buyer. We want this. Now, and there is a part down here for the seller to sign, which we've already put in our name. You want to fill that out, but you want a copy of the buyer's signature on this receipt. It's possible that they're going to give you a receipt anyhow, right? Do you understand? If I represent a buyer, does everybody know that there's a fax machine out there, right? You can tell because it's a machine that nobody ever seems to touch, right? And next to the fax machine are a stack, typically, of these booklets, right? Plus, I think there's some in the bins, plus there's digital copies as well. So if I'm working with a buyer, what I'm supposed to do is give them the book, either in person or digitally, and get them to sign it. Now, that's really the receipt for that book. If the buyer's agent gives you their receipt for the book, that's fine. They look pretty much the same, but there's slight differences. But do you understand, you want a receipt for the book signed by the seller and signed by the buyer. Otherwise, Lindsay's going to be, frowning at you. Yes?
So when you're working with a buyer, you'll get the form in disclosures from the listing agent
Yeah.
a lot of times. So is that acceptable, or should we be getting? when
You
we're
should be
working
getting,
with a
you're
buyer-
supposed, the law says you're supposed to be doing this when it says, I have received a copy of environmental hazard and safety book. Now, what we're saying is a listing agent, we really don't care if they did or not, as long as they signed a receipt and turned it into us. But if you're the agent representing the buyer, your job is to make sure they actually got a copy of the book. So whether or not, and what I'm saying is that if you already have a receipt and you don't want to fill out this one because you already got one, you gave us that one, Lindsay's not here to defend herself, but I would say one is as good as the other. Yes?
So when do you do it? When you put an offer with a buyer on a house, is that when you get it signed, or?
Well, that's a good question. When should you get this signed? When should you do agency disclosure?
Up front.
Up front. Is that okay? A little blank.
Yeah.
So, but how much up front? What does the agency disclosure law say is when you're supposed to make agency disclosure if you're working with a buyer?
What's the offer?
Before you write the offer. That's what it says. It says that you're supposed to do it when your relationship with the buyer is more than transitory, but no later than when you write an offer. So doing it before you write an offer is considered doing it this is like saying, when do you pull the ripcord on your parachute? And your answer is before you hit the ground, right? Whereas my answer would be from a comfortable height, right? So when you're doing a buyer consultation is when you're supposed to be doing agency disclosure, but no later than when you write the offer. Could you, in a buyer's consultation, discuss environmental hazards? Right? Would that make it easier than doing everything when you're writing the offer? Right? So I would do this in a buyer's consultation. One of my theories, which not only applied to listing appointments, but to buyer consultations, that if I made them long enough, people wouldn't want to have another. Right? Do you understand? When somebody was done with my buyer's consultation, the last thing they were thinking of is, let's go talk to another agent and go through this again. Right? So that would be I would do this in a buyer consultation, give them the booklet, get a receipt. They don't have to have read and understood the booklet, but should this be something that they ought to be thinking about before they write an offer? Yes.
So you have to do this for each offer that you make for? the
No,
buyer?
you don't do it for each offer, you have to do it for each client. Basically, it says that you've given them a copy of the booklet. So agency disclosure and this one does not have to be done for every offer, you just have to keep a copy of it. Right, and give it to the listing agent and put it in the file. Give it to your transaction coordinator. All right, so if I represent a buyer, I should already have one of these. But do you understand, from Lindsay's point of view and from the office point of view, we don't know if the buyer's agent gave a copy to the buyer. We don't have, we want a signature on a receipt so that we can put it in our file. Right, do you understand? If you read the booklet, it'll discourage you from owning anything. And basically, it says that the carpet and furniture is killing you, right? That there's formaldehyde. Now, my program did well on this page. The California Energy Commission, what is my energy rating? This, by the way, is part of a book. It's part of that same environmental hazards book. So what we meaning Lindsay, has done, and the office has gone through and torn out all the different parts of that book that require signatures, and we put them here. Right? Because what happened is people get the book and then they don't sign all the places where their signatures required. So we want the property address, and I've received a copy of what is your home energy rating. There's a place for everybody to sign, right? I like to type it out, right? And the seller signatures we can drop in. I'm gonna show you how to do it. Here's the San Jose street tree disclosure form. Notice my program didn't find any of those fields. But I'll make an interactive one. I'm sure there's one available. The property address, signatures of the buyer and sellers. And basically, you ought to read this, but basically it says that you're supposed to have a certain number of trees in front of your house. And if you cut them down or they die, you're supposed to replace them. You're not, yeah, you're supposed to. Supposed to replace them. Right, neighbors are the ones that generally police this. We just want this filled out. The seller advisory regarding completing the transfer disclosure statement. This is sort of a don't lie and be complete is really what all of this says. Spend some time with the TDS walking through your property. By the way, as an agent, are you supposed to, how much help are you supposed to give the seller in filling out the transfer disclosure statement? I wouldn't, none is such a extreme word.
Very little. Very little.
You're not, you're supposed to explain to them that they're supposed to do it. By the way, we'll get to that one, right? We'll get to that one. There's one of the advantages, I'll say it now, but in the upper left-hand corner, I think so, of the transfer disclosure statement, there's a box that is checked, that can be checked, that I would be checking, that says that this disclosure is made pursuant to attached reports and things like that, which would mean that a property inspection can be incorporated into the transfer disclosure statement if you get it done in advance and you check the box and you mention it there. Right? You see, one of the other reasons for, I felt, getting a property, a roof, a chimney, and all the inspections is that it made it much less likely that we were going to omit something that was important. Right? So trying to remember issues, repairs, leaks, and other damage, add any of these to if you had a repair to a remodel of the property. By the way, fresh paint is a red flag. Right? Fresh paint's a red flag. Because the question comes up, what's behind the paint? Fresh paint on the ceiling is a real red flag, right? Especially if it rained recently. But any remodels, you should include copies of contracts, bids, or estimates if you still have them. One of the big problems, if a seller wants to get sued, is if they've had a fire, fixed it, and then don't disclose that they had a fire and that they did something. Because what will happen is people will be in there and the windows will be closed and they'll be able to smell smoke. It's very difficult to get rid of. You should attach additional sheets if necessary. By the way, I would go through this with somebody, right? You understand? We're going to email it to them, but even if you disagree with them, disclose whether you're aware of any issues or disputes with neighbors. By the way, my rule was if somebody said to me, should I disclose? It doesn't matter how they finish the sentence, the answer is yes. I had a listing in North Valley, and a challenging seller, and she told me, she said, the neighbors turned their hose on her when she's walking in from her car carrying groceries.
Oh my God.
That's what she said. And she said, should I disclose that? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
And so she wrote a 3-page And I was double-ending that transaction, and I showed it to the buyers, and they're like, wow, you know. And so I suggested, and by the way, she wrote all of the problems with the homeowner association. Everything was terrible. The people there were terrible. She went on and on and on. And so I suggested that they talk to the head of the homeowner association, which happened to be her brother. And they went and knocked on the neighbor's door, the buyer did, and talked to the buyers. And afterwards, they said everything is wonderful, that they concluded from talking to the brother, who's the head of the homeowner association, and to the neighbors, that the only real problem in this complex was her. And that when she was gone, everybody was going to be happy, right? But do you understand? I said, why don't you go talk to the neighbor? Go talk to the neighbors and hear, right? But does everybody understand that any dispute like this should be handled prior to the close of escrow? Any old reports, disclosures, inspections, surveys, bids, disclose any lawsuits, neighborhood nuisances such as noise or odors which affect the property. All right? And by the way, if you're an agent, you should mention if you can hear what you can hear. All right? You should mention it. Changes in construction, if you were told information which you're not able to verify. Basically, we're saying report rumors, gossip, anything. When in doubt, disclose, and there's a place for them to have read the advisory. Are we having fun with this? By the way, on we'll see how many of these we can get through today. Agent authorization, this is a list of things for inspections and reports. There is the California Association of Realtors also has a form. We don't really care if you use their form or this form as long as we have an authorization. Notice there's yeses and nos. So my strong suggestion is that if you represent the seller, you get all the inspections and reports that any buyer could possibly order and get them in advance. All right. Make sure that the buyer gets them prior to making an offer and they sign a receipt. And so here's the list. Now, notice geological flood hazard zone disclosure and environmental risk report the risk is an add-on. Right, so the 6 is referring to the JCP property ID. Asbestos, electrical, this isn't a bad MAI. Does that, do you know what that stands for?
Razor.
That's right, it stands, those initials I think mean made as instructed. Isn't that what that stands for? Something like that? Something like that? Past tense, it used to. So, copies of permit, mold inspection, everything, right? And if you use the other form, we don't really care.
The add-on that you referred to the environmental,
Let's see, the environmental is the add-on.
environmental risk, oh, I thought you said the environmental risk report was an add-on to the geological.
It is.
Okay. Is that, do you normally get that? with the
I
base
always
system?
did. It costs like $20 more.
Okay, and what's that look like?
It shows if there's abandoned gas stations, any known environmental hazards in
So
the
less
area.
sites,
Yeah.
okay.
It's basically pretty much all, the NHD people, all they do is search the internet, right? But they already know where to go. So if there's abandoned gas stations, paint stores, or other facilities in the area that might be environmental hazards that are listed as such, it discloses those. It's like $20, maybe 30, right? More. And if I represented a buyer and you didn't have one, I would get one. And if we found something, we would be talking about why are you charging us so much if you're in a hazardous neighborhood, right? So why not get the whole thing?
Why would you wanna get an appraisal? I mean, that's $500 or $600 that somebody's gonna be paying
Why would you want to get an appraisal
in advance.
in advance?
Just to show the buyers what it, if you're asking for a certain dollar amount.
Have you ever had I've not done that often, but sometimes. Let's say you have a listing and there are absolutely no comps. no clue. You got no clue, right? I had a listing in Almaden, and I was farming an area called Woodside, so everything had wood, and they're all citation homes, and everything was wonderful, and this guy wants to sell his property, and I put it into the real list, and this does, what I'm looking at is not a house I'm at all familiar with. And apparently, 20 years before, a spec developer had bought a little chunk of land and built like 6 semi-custom homes, right? None of them have ever sold since. And all the comps around it are what were then 40-year-old citation homes, tract homes. There are no comparables for this house. Nothing in the area looks like it, nothing was built at the same time, nothing is ever sold like that, right? And so what's it worth? I'm not sure, right? By the way, what I did is I figured out what the median price was in Almaden when they bought it, and I figured out how much it's gone up, and I showed it to them and I said, does that look like a good number? And they said, I guess so, right? You know, nobody had any idea, so they paid to have an appraiser come out and appraise it. Right, and the appraiser didn't have any more data than I did, but at least the guy had the sign of something saying, I think it's worth this. So we had something that we could show to a buyer as to why we came up with the price. Right? Not a common thing, but that's what you do when there are no comps and you don't think that you don't know. Right? Particularly if it's something strange. All right. Any other? So this list, copies of permits. I used to make sure if they had done stuff to get copies of the permits. There's differences of opinion about that. JCP, LexisNexis. I drive one. No, that's not right. This is the seller authorization for a clue report. We need the seller to agree to run this report. All right. The seller has to agree that we can run the report. And that's the comprehensive loss underwriting evaluation, I believe is what the E stands for. And then you send it to them. Drought advisory. Yeah, that's a newer one.
Mm-hmm.
The buyer needs to understand that there may not be any water. I don't know. Any questions about that? Yeah.
So that last form, if we're working with a buyer, should we give that to them?
Yes.
Okay.
You should give this on every transaction. We want that.
Right. Okay.
Buyer or seller. Right? Every transaction.
On the LexisNexis River, what was that for again?
Clue, that's basically it's a report showing how many claims have been filed on the property for insurance purposes. And if there's too many, they're going to have trouble. And if they can't,
5 years?
it goes back 5 years. If there's too many, they're going to have trouble. And if they have too much trouble, the buyer won't be able to get a loan. All right, so was that fun so far? Those are the office ones. Why don't we just look at some of the others? Does that seem like a fun thing to do? Since we're disclosing. And the last time I did this, Lindsay was here to say no, but we actually agreed on everything, so. And she has a life, so she's not here. All right. So, I know. Me, not so much. So let's see, what do we have here? So that list, remember one of the forms that I showed you had a list, right? So the list this was the list. So let's look at what's on the list. Now, residential listing agreement, I know we've added that. Disclosure, we've added that. Seller exclusion from the MLS, we added that. HOA information, if there is one, we added that. Not wind forms, not wind forms, not wind forms. Agent visual inspection disclosure. How about that one? Mm-hmm. Right, that seems like a nice form. And so the AVID, let's say it happens, sometimes it's good at finding stuff, sometimes not so much. So AVID, what's happening? let me go back. Back. All right, let me try this again. I mean, that may be a different one than what I started with, so. What do we find? Agent's visual inspection disclosure number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. There could be a lot of agents disclosing, right? So you might as well pick number 1. And it says it was successfully added. My suggestion is that you do this after you've had a chance to take a peek at the property inspection, the roof inspection, the chimney inspection, and things like that. Now, you're not required to crawl under the house and do stuff like that. You're not supposed to do that. But it might seem kind of silly if the property inspector saw something that looked obvious and took a picture of it and you didn't notice it when you looked at it, right? So I would tend to want to do it after I'd seen a property inspection, right? At least, right? Just because there may be some obvious things. So we're gonna fill this up. The property is a duplex or fourplex. They have it as for unit number, right? So you could, that's why 4, right? Because you could, each unit you're supposed to do this. Now, but I don't know if we need to get into this, but duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are more difficult or challenging, right? Particularly if they're rented out already. Because it's common if they're rented out that you have to make the offer subject to inspection, which means they haven't inspected the property, nor are they going to let you do it until your offer's been accepted. Does that understand? In other words, they're not disrupting the tenants to do all these things in advance. Typically, they don't do that. So what you do is you schedule one day, one big day, where everybody shows up. You get the appraiser there that day, the property inspector, the roof inspector, everybody. You're there, the other agent's there. Everybody does everything on that day. There's an agent from the office that the property was located someplace else. And it was a fourplex, and she wasn't there that day because it was a long way, and the seller said, you don't need to be there. And they locked up, and she hadn't done the AVID yet, right? And did you understand, for the tenants, you have to give notice. How much notice do you have to give?
48 hours.
24 hours.
No, that was 48.
48 hours is for a walkthrough inspection. Right, so you have to give them 24 hours notice, and are they happy? So do you understand? So now, first of all, it was like in Richmond or someplace like that. It's a long drive, right? We have to give everybody notice again. Everything needs to be done on that day, right? Inspection performed by, this is the name of the office. Notice that didn't get auto-populated. Not all of them work beautifully. And inspection performed by, this is for unit, it's inspection date, time, weather conditions, other persons present, and then you would go through and write in things that you noticed. Now, again, if you had a property inspection, might lead you, be a bird dog, pointing at certain things you ought to look at. The idea here is not to be judgmental. Right. So, for example, let's say there are cracks in the wall. Let's say in your view there are small cracks, should you say small cracks in the wall? Hairline cracks in the wall?
No.
What appears to be normal wall cracking, right? Right? Do you understand? You're not an expert on what is a small crack or a normal crack, and so you just say there are cracks in the wall. By the way, don't make this look like your property flyer, right? I've seen lots of these over the years, and it's just, you see one where it says living rooms with view, right? Spacious, right? This isn't a description of the amenities of the house. It's a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection. You state the following things, and there you can read this, right, if you want to. Why don't we just look at this? So it requires, with limited exception, to conduct a reasonably competent visual inspection of reasonably and normally accessible areas of certain properties offered for sale, and then disclose to the prospective purchaser material facts affecting the value. Material fact is anything that would affect the value or desirability of the property. Anything. That the inspection reveals. The duty applies regardless of whom the agent represents. It applies to residential dwellings containing 1 to 4 units, manufactured homes, applies to standalone, detached, applies to lease, does not require you to areas that are not normally and reasonably and normally accessible. You don't have to pry up floors. You don't have to crawl in the attic. Areas off site of the property. So, by the way, is it possible that things are going on to the neighborhood that might concern the buyer? Right? You're not required in this disclosure to do investigations, right? Because they're off site. You might want to point the buyer. You might want to disclose it. Public records or permits are not part of this. It's not your duty, representing either the buyer or the seller, to go down and pull permits. However, they may ask for that. They may want you to. That's something else. Common areas, you're not supposed to do that. So, and it says you will not climb onto the roof or into an attic. Is that nice to know?
Yeah.
You will not move or look or behind furniture, pictures, wall hanging, or floor covering. You will not look up chimneys or into cabinets or open locked doors. You're not going to inspect beneath a house. You're not going to operate appliances. That's what the property inspector does. Environment, you're not going to look for asbestos and all this other kind of stuff.
Do you have to do this for raw land?
No. 1 to 4 units residential dwellings.
Okay, I was told to do that.
Well, 1 to 4, it says, what does the form say?
That's pretty easy. Dirt,
Dirt.
Trees.
dirt,
Yeah.
trees.
It says the duty applies to residential real properties containing 1 to 4 dwelling units and manufactured homes. Does not apply to raw land. Does not apply to commercial. Doesn't apply to business opportunities. Yes.
How detailed do you get, like, say the rugs are stained, do you mention that?
You can
Like,
say rugs are
but you
stained.
can't say normal wear and tear, you
No.
just have to say.
Just say wear and tear.
Okay.
It's the word, it's the judgment, it's the word normal that causes trouble. Yes.
Now, when I do what I call the final walkthrough, I do turn on everything, including the dishwasher, and make sure it works. So you're
That's-
telling me that's something I
I'm
don't
not
need
saying
to
you
do?
shouldn't do that during the walkthrough. I'm saying that you don't do that during the
For-
transfer disclosure.
Right, okay, thank you.
Right?
But are you talking about representing a buyer?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
So
wanna make
when-
sure everything works for them, and, even in a little condo, I found something that wasn't working right,
Right.
and they hurried up and got it fixed before
Okay.
we closed.
So.
'Cause you've got 5 days.
When is it an appropriate time to do the AVID for when you're representing a buyer?
I would do it soon, right? For example, if you're having your own, the question is, are you having your own inspections? Right? Now, if you were having your own inspections, as a listing agent, I tended not to be there when the buyer's inspections were going on because I was busy and it seemed like that was your job, right? But if I represented the buyer, I definitely wanted to be there for the property inspection because it made the AVID a whole lot easier
And
to
that's
fill
when you
out.
should do your AVID.
Right, I would walk around with them, and I'd say, "Oh yeah, I see that," and write it into, right. That would be easiest. If not, I would rather have read the property inspection before I did mine. But if worse came to worse, you just have to go do it. But all of this needs to be done before the buyer removes their contingencies.
Yep.
All right. So how soon do you do it? When are the contingencies supposed to be removed?
7
Right.
to 10.
Before that
Yeah,
is when you
before
want to do
that.
this. Right? So, and then there's, you just write down things that you see that are wrong. You sign it, date it, the seller signs it, the buyer signs it. And that's the transfer disclosure statement. Any other, the agent's visual inspection disclosure. Let's go back here. So, as we're going through our list, the carbon monoxide. That also is found in most of the JCP reports as well. Right? Most of them have, the JCP, by the way, sounds like, in our industry, it's become almost generic for natural hazard disclosure. It's like saying Xerox or something, or at least the way Xerox used to be. And I do not believe, of course, again, Lindsay's not here to complain, but whether you use, if you had all of these things in the JCP report, then you don't need to do them all again, right? Question,
So just back
go ahead.
when you clicked on forms on the right, there's this disclosure, there's 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4, it ends with 4, and the reason for that is that if there's a fourplex, there's 4 units. The
Oh, they're all the same
triplex, there's
form.
3, no, they don't go on the same form.
No,
You
they're
do
all
one-
the same.
They're all the same.
They're all the
form.
same form, it's just
Okay.
that you could you'd have one for unit 1, one for unit 2, one for unit 3, one for unit 4. Right? And on the form, if you want to get back to it, it says which unit is this one for. See, for example, there's a box here, this property, and this is for unit number 1. Which means the next one would be 2.
Okay.
The next one 3, next one 4. If there's more than 4, you don't have to worry about it. Right? Because if you're buying something that's 5 or more units, you're supposed to know what you're doing already. All right, and get your own inspections. Right, so these rules were generally designed for amateurs. So the carbon monoxide form, basically, what's the rule for carbon monoxide? Got to have them. How many?
One on every floor, and I'm
It's
trying to remember about upstairs bedrooms, I can't remember.
requires that as of July all existing single-family dwellings have carbon monoxide installed, and that all other types have before exceptions, disclosure, compliance. At a minimum, placement of carbon monoxide detectors, if applicable, outside of each sleeping area and on each floor in a multi-level dwelling, but additionally may depend on other business codes. So a minimum of one outside each sleeping area and on each floor of a dwelling.
So,
Appraiser looks for this as well, right? They're not going to appraise a property for this.
that's true.
Yeah,
So if you have a 4-bedroom, 2-story house, of course you need 1 downstairs, and you need 4 upstairs for a total of 5.
not 4 necessarily. By the way, the property inspectors will
Outside
oftentimes
sleeping
suggest that you have more than the minimum requirement.
True.
Right, so if, assuming you, outside of the bedrooms,
Mm-hmm.
on the second floor, you could have 1, and then
Downstairs.
1 downstairs.
Okay.
In a hallway.
Just
In a hallway.
remember.
Right,
This is carbon monoxide?
carbon monoxide. As smoke detectors, which is a different rule, and that's actually built into the transfer disclosure statement. It used to be a separate back in the old days, now it's all part of it. Requires that you have a smoke detector on every level for which there are bedrooms, which would be considered kind of a minimum standard. Right.
Okay, that's confusing. I thought it was smoke detector outside of each bedroom and in each bedroom, and then carbon monoxide is one.
No, no.
They're expensive.
Yeah, well, anyhow, so, see, this is more fun than I thought it was gonna be. The possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, we'll look at the smoke detector and water heater is coming up later. That, by the way, is now just included in the RPA, right? You can't avoid that. Lead-based paint disclosure, what year does the property have, how old does the property be? What year is what's called target housing?
So 478.
1978. Should you do one anyhow?
Mm-hmm.
Why not? Why should you do one anyhow? Lindsay's going to ask you for it because she's been trained to ask. And I don't know why this isn't doing it for me. Let me try this again. It likes me to. Lead-based paint. Now, again, it's get all this stuff together. get them to sign it. Basically, this doesn't take very long to explain. There's the lead-based paint booklet from the EPA as part of that environmental hazards book. Basically what this says, this is what I would say to somebody. I would say, have you ever had a test done on your paint? Ever had paint samples taken to a lab and have had it tested? No one has ever said yes to that question. I said, fine. If you had done that and you knew that there was lead, you have to say so. Do you know that there is lead-based paint in this property? No one has ever said yes. The reality, by the way, is if it was built before 1978, it probably has lead-based paint. It was a really good additive to paint, right? And so most paint had lead in it prior to 1978. But we don't know, right? That it wasn't all. So it says, we have no knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard other than the followings. Do you know of any? No, we leave it blank. We have no reports or record. Have you had any tests done? Do you have any reports or records? No, we leave it blank. Sign and date. Sign and date. Then up here, listing agent's acknowledgement that I have informed the seller or landlord's obligation is where the agent's responsibility, you sign and date. Now, the buyer would be doing the same thing. They might be doing it on this form. They might be doing it on another form. Whatever, as long as we get it all in. But again, this is part of all of the stuff that we give them. All right, is everybody with me? All right. Market conditions advisory, I may have already put that one in, but the market conditions advisory essentially says the market is insane and you should not expect it to last. By the way, my suggestion would be is that you read all of these, all right, so that you can explain them. Many real estate agents, we go through the DISC profile, high Ds don't read these things. Right? We have agents that are very good at getting people to sign stuff but have never read any of the forms that they get people to sign. But if your client is a high C, they're going to read the form. And when they ask you questions about things and you're like, really, it says that? Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, you learn something every day. Right? You don't want your doctor to be saying, gee, you learn something every day, don't you? Right? You don't want your real estate agent. So as a buyer, you're responsible for determining the price you want to offer for a property. Right? We're in no way going to influence them as to how high they should offer. Isn't that right? Although brokers may provide you with comparable sales data, generally from information, you should know that the reporting of this data is often delayed and prices may change up or down. You should be sure you're comfortable with the price they're offering and the price they are accepting in a counteroffer. I don't know if the word comfortable. You should, if your offer is accepted, looks like it's missing an O there. If your offer is accepted, the property's value may not increase and may even decrease. If your if your offer is accepted, you may have buyer's remorse. Right? In the old days, we used to have these. They used to sell these pills. Right? They're actually like little gelatin tablets, and it said buyer's remorse. And you'd give them to clients and tell them that when it happens, to just take two, take two pills.
Call me in the morning.
Call me in the morning.
Yeah.
Classic.
So you can still feel the same way.
Right, buyer's remorse. If your offer is rejected, there can be no guarantee that you'll find a similar property at the same price. That's the other side of the other shoe is dropping. If your offer is rejected, you may not be satisfied that the amount you offered was right for you. Right? Only you can determine what you want to offer. Right? So if you offer too high, you may be sad that you paid too much. If you offer too low, you're not going to get the house. Right? Short and sweet. Non-contingent offers. This basically makes it clear what the issues are. Right? If they don't have a loan contingency, but they do have a loan, something could go wrong that they don't know about and they could lose their deposit, is what it says. If they don't have an appraisal contingency and it doesn't appraise, they're required to make up the difference in cash. I think I talked about this last week, you can write in a clause, and you should go through it with them. 25,000, did you really pay? Yes. How about 35? How about 45? How about, until they say no, there's no way we would add that much more, and then you say property must appraise for at least, and put in that amount. All right, and then more inspection contingency. By the way, if I were a listing agent, I wouldn't want to sell the property without all the reports. All right, because the buyer's going to sue when they find things that are wrong. And it's very difficult when you're in, it's very difficult to take the position, well, we pushed them into it, they didn't, it's their fault that they didn't inspect the property. So you want to make sure that they have a loan contingency if they need one, an appraisal contingency if they need one, and an inspection contingency. It's easier if the seller has all the reports and they're acceptable. Broker recommends that you do not write a non-contingent offer even if you're planning on paying all cash for the property. Right? One of the things, by the way, fixer-uppers, agents are, I get this from people that I'm coaching, where the issue is a property inspector is not going to tell you what it's going to cost to fix stuff. Right? The roof guy and the chimney and the termite will give you an estimate for repairs, but the property inspector will not. Which means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that might need to be fixed and you have no idea how much it's going to cost. So what you need, the investors that I worked with that bought fixer-uppers had a contractor that they would bring with them that was trained to bid what it would cost to fix things. So that the contractor is going around saying so much for the bathroom, so much for the kitchen, so much for this is what I think it would cost to do a reasonable job in fixing this place up, right? So the property inspector is going to say the plumbing leaks, but will not tell you how much it's going to cost to replace the plumbing, right? They're going to say the electrical system is shot, but they're not going to tell you what it's going to cost to fix the electrical system. So if you're working on a fixer-upper with a person who's an investor, especially one who doesn't know what they're doing, the suggestion is to get a contractor to look at the property before they write the offer, preferably, or certainly within the inspection period. Otherwise, how do you know what it's going to cost to fix stuff? Right? Multiple offers, it's not illegal. While it is not illegal to make offers on multiple properties with the intent to purchase only one, you can be obligated to many sellers if more than one accepts. It's not illegal, right? So,
Is there any type of disclosure statement you can write in to cover your buyer if that's what they intend to do?
is there, no, not as such. If you were to, if I'm the listing agent and you tell me that you're making multiple offers, I'll just throw yours away.
Sure.
Right, so there are ways to get out, but basically what this is saying is you want to, there's nothing, it says it's not illegal,
Yeah,
right?
fine line.
But if the buyer has not disclosed that the buyer is writing multiple offers with the intent to purchase only one, and the buyer subsequently cancels without using a contingency, that's the operative phrase, the seller may claim the buyer has breached the contract. So you can't, you just need to do it wisely. But generally, it's better not to do that.
Sure.
And then there's a thing about for the seller. All right, well, we've spent an hour on this. Why don't we, next week, how about this? Next week I'll go through the rest of the forms that are on CAR, and we'll actually send them. And by then I'll see if I can get all of those with the right little
That'd be
boxes
great.
filled in.
Is there a separate online or soft copy of the booklet, earthquake, and all the other?
Is there an online copy of the booklet?
I'm sure
Great
there is.
question. If you go over here to where the forms are, and you open them up, we're going to get rid of that, and you click on Select Library, one of them is California EPUBs. And if you click on EPUBs, you're going to see your environmental hazards, protect your family from red, home rating, homeowner's guide to earthquake safety, signature page to print. There's a buyer-seller's guide. to the California Residential Purchase Agreement. There's a commercial property one, a consumer's guide to disclosure requirements for buyers. I don't even know what that's about. A green living brochure and property transaction booklet and a guide to residential. There's a whole bunch of stuff.
Some of them are
Right.
pretty good. They basically, in a nutshell, explain a lot of the documents that we use.
Yeah. So this is all included, and any of these things, if we were to add that, could be done electronically, sent to them. See, this is the residential one. And, you know, and the only difference is that the books have all of those things together. Whereas this is separated because they might be thinking, well, you don't have to do earthquake because of the, by the way, everybody has to get the earthquake booklet, not everybody has to sign the earthquake disclosure form. Those are two different issues. So it's just easier to just do them all. Next week, we'll do the rest of the disclosures, yes?
I had a question about it, just, I don't know if it's a disclosure form, but it's a form that Santa Cruz County wants, sellers to sign, that the county agencies can share information, and I had a seller that refused to sign that form. You know, he was willing to disclose that there weren't permits for certain things, but he didn't want, you know, the building department to be talking to the tax assessor, et cetera. Is that,
I don't know anything about that form.
oh, you haven't seen that form?
No.
Okay.
I stay over the hill,
Okay.
so I don't know about that one. But is it a form that's done by the association or done by agents or done by the
It's
city?
done, I think it's done by Santa Cruz County.
Well, then,
It's a form that says, you know, basically you give up your right to privacy from these agencies. They can talk to one another.
I'm shocked to hear that Santa Cruz would do that. All right. But I don't know about that particular.